What's going on, guys? Well, ever since Resident Evil 3 has been released and I did my ranking, I have been going through absolute Resident Evil fever. I have the T-virus right now, guys. I've been replaying Resident Evil 2, 3, I replayed a little bit of 4, I just beat 7 again. I have been going nuts, and I've even I've played a couple of games that was missing from my ranking that you guys said that I should have included. So, after this ranking, within a day or so, you're gonna get an updated ranking of the Resident Evil games where I'm gonna include Resident Evil 0 and I'm gonna include Resident Evil Code Veronica. Did not realize how passionate fans were about those. I didn't know that they were really considered to be mainline games in the mainline storyline, so I rectified that. It's the first time I've ever done that for a ranking, so keep your eyes out for that one. But this ranking is something that I thought would be very cool to do, which is ranking the scariest Resident Evil monsters. Now keep in mind, there's still some of these games that I have not played. I've played all of them from Resident Evil 0 all the way through to Resident Evil 7 now. None of the offshoot games really I played, so if there's anything from Revelations or Umbrella Corps or any of those other little weird one-offs, they're not gonna be on this list. So this is just gonna include the main games. And always, guys, please like and share this video if you enjoyed it. If you enjoyed it so much that you want to subscribe, that is awesome. Please do that. You will get much more rankings like this, especially horror films. I do a lot of focus on movies, but once in a while I get a little bit of video game fever and you get things like this. And if you enjoyed it so much that you want to help contribute to this channel and get cool exclusive content for your eyes only, my Patreon link is down below. That's the best way to do that. Best way to help this channel out and get some cool shit for your eyes only, such as a Patreon pick, which is something that I believe dropped just a couple of days ago. So check out that video as well, top 10 final girls. But as far as Resident Evil goes, number 10, as far as my top 10 scariest Resident Evil monsters, number 10 absolutely has to be Nosferatu. Now this is an enemy that I just had my first experience with last weekend when I was playing through Code Veronica, and it's just the character design. Like, there's a really creepy lore to this character where it was the Ashford father and they experimented on him and it went wrong, so they just locked his ass in the basement and he was just chained to the wall, morphing and being tortured for years and years and years. When he finally gets out, it's like a vampire that's walking around with his hand shackled, a big ass heart. He can't see, but he has these big ass like arms from The Thing. And while obviously the graphics and everything were dated, so if this was like a remake, it probably would be higher on this list, I thought he was creepy enough as a character as far as the lore and the look, and he was tough enough of a boss battle with the fog and everything going on, a very atmospheric boss battle that he had to make my list at number 10. Number 9, start the controversy, baby. Number 9 for me is Nemesis. Now this is not top 10 coolest, otherwise he would be up there probably at number 1. This is top 10 scariest. And for me, I only played the original Resident Evil 3 one time. I played it on the GameCube port back when Resident Evil 4 came out and I became a Resident Evil fan, so I was kind of trying to play whatever I could. And the Resident Evil 3 remake Nemesis is much more action-centric than he is scary to me. So while I think that the design of him is badass and creepy, and his pursuit for you is creepy, and he can certainly jump out and do a couple of creepy jump scares, I do have him down at number 9 because I feel like he's much more of a cool villain than a scary villain. But he's scary enough in his unrelenting pursuit of you as Jill Valentine to make it here at number 9. Number 8 for me is going to be kind of an underrated pick as far as I'm concerned, and that is Torres Mendes, the first boss battle in Resident Evil 4. I think it was the first boss battle. He was the first human-ish boss battle at least, but it's more so the atmosphere of this boss battle with this barn that's slowly being set on fire, on top of how this dude like changes throughout this boss battle. Like, he's obviously a big intimidating figure in the first portion of the game. You know he's tough. But as soon as you start kicking his ass and his spine extends into like this centipede look and he's got like a top half with legs, then he's chasing you around like that. You gotta get him to another part of the boss battle where eventually his spine tears off and he's just the upper torso and his arms and he's swinging around on those rafters coming after you. This fucking dude is terrifying. And then this is one guy that I think if they do a Resident Evil 4 remake, They better keep him in the game, and they better make him even more terrifying than he originally was. Like with some darkness and some shadows, this dude could make it to #1 with a proper remake. Number 7 is also going to be from Resident Evil 4, and this is Verdugo. This is the guy that I refer to as the Mimic monster. He kind of looks like that cockroach thing from the movie Mimic, you know what I'm talking about. But nonetheless, this is a character that is kind of teased throughout a big chapter of this game with the castle chapter. He's kind of like the hooded assistant to that little short fucker in the castle segment, but you get to this underground part to where you're in like a sewer setting, and suddenly the game changes to this POV view of something like walking on the walls, kind of like a xenomorph, and you're like, what the fuck is that? And then you go a little bit further and it happens again, and eventually it just starts shooting its tail. It really comes out of Alien. Like it's straight out of Alien or Aliens. You get this little tail with a spine on it, shooting through the wall, shooting through the floors, and you have to dodge that. Then eventually when you get to Verdugo, he is this insectoid monster that's fast as hell, he's tall as shit, and you have to really use some good technique to kill him, where you have to freeze him with this nitrous and then eventually shoot him, and he's just an intimidating encounter above anything else, but he does have a very cool look to him, which brings him up here to number 7 for me. Number 6 is one that, especially if you played with the VR, you know what I'm talking about. Jack Baker. Now you could probably make an argument just as much for Marguerite, his wife, but for me, Jack was much more terrifying because he was your first encounter in Resident Evil 7. Now I played the game entirely on the VR my first 2 playthroughs, and that does nothing but enhance everything that this game does great as far as the horror and the tension, especially with Jack Baker, where you wake up and you're attached to this table and you're having to figure out the game mechanics and kind of figure out what exactly you're doing, and then suddenly he just walks through a hallway and you have to either avoid him, or if he sees you, you just hear in surround sound, he's like, "Ah, I see you, boy," and he's coming after you with a fucking shovel, and you're like, "Oh," and he's right there in your face. Then you get a whole other boss battle with him where you're inside of this garage. You have barely any room to run around, and he's coming at you after he's been kind of halfway burned up and trying to kill you again. You're stuck into a car trying to get away, and he rips the fucking hood off and gets into the car with you. And then you get this whole chainsaw fight, which is just absolutely intense, especially on the VR, where he's coming after you with this chainsaw hedge trimmer thing where he's got 2 chainsaws coming together and he's slashing at you, and you're like, holy shit! And you just feel everything in these boss battles, like, and then you play him again later on and he's got the eyes, you know, whatever. That kind of downgraded a bit for me, but nonetheless, Jack Baker, all of the first couple encounters you had with him, especially in the VR, was some of the most terrifying shit that I have ever experienced in a video game. And it's really only because of that kind of cliche way that they take him out in the game, and the fact that the characters above him are just so awesome, why he is at number 6 for me, but he could easily be higher. Number 5 is kind of the new big daddy on the block, and that is Mr. X. Now obviously Mr. X was in the original Resident Evil 2, but the remake version of him brought him to a whole new level, to where me, as well as a lot of other fans it seems, would actually put him above Nemesis as a better villain and a more intense experience in a video game. Mr. X was insane in the Resident Evil 2 remake. I can't speak too much on the original. Again, like Resident Evil 3, I played it like maybe 2 times on GameCube. Don't have a whole lot of memory about that original game, but I remember a lot about Resident Evil 2, the remake, obviously. So this is a character that shows up about a third of the way through the game, somewhere in there, and from then on, he just relentlessly pursues you throughout this entire police station, throughout the sewers, throughout this lab. This is a guy that is terrifying in the sense that he scares the shit out of you even when he's not in the room. Like there's times where you're in a room and you're doing shit and you're trying to unlock a safe, or you're trying to read some files and you just hear footsteps, kaboom, kaboom, and you're like, oh fuck. This is a guy that lets his presence be known, that he is always out there looking for you. And whenever you do open a room or he opens a door and just comes in, he's like, guess who, bitch? You're like, ah! And you gotta turn around and just haul ass the other direction, which is a bitch when you're kind of learning the layout of the police station for the first time, where your objective is right there in that room and you've traveled your ass off to get there, and all of a sudden you step into a room and see him and you're like, fuck. And you gotta turn around and just go the opposite direction and go all the way around to try to avoid him or hide, which is a little bit more difficult to do, but This is not only a fun encounter, but this dude is just terrifying. I mean, he kind of evolves throughout the game. He always shows up at the worst moments, right when you feel like you can take a gasp of breath. I just got through that objective. He's fucking back. Mr. X, number 5. Number 4 is gonna be the Crimson Heads from the Resident Evil remake. Now, I actually just discovered that this was something that was only in the remake. Like I said in my ranking of all the games, the original Resident Evil on PlayStation is the only original game that I never got a chance to play. So my only experience with the first Resident Evil is the remake from GameCube and the subsequent HD upgrades that we've gotten ported over to like PS3, PS4. Now, these Crimson Heads are essentially what happens if you leave a zombie unattended for too long. If you shot one dead and he's in this room and you have not lit him on fire, eventually when you go back into that room, that motherfucker just stands up like, and he's covered in red, and he's 1,000 times faster and more vicious and more ferocious than he was when he was a zombie. They got claws and shit, and it scares the living shit out of you. The first time that you encounter these things. It's kind of a scripted moment where you walk past it and he just goes, and you've taken it for granted at this point that if you've cleared a room, you can just walk through willy-nilly like, fuck it, there ain't no threats here. And whoosh, this dude just stands up and just chases you, and those old-fashioned tank controls where you're like, oh shit, oh, I gotta get out of here, oh. The Crimson Heads need to make their return. If they're gonna keep doing these remakes, if they're gonna eventually do a modern remake of the first Resident Evil, those things better come back, because my God, they are terrifying. Number 3 is going to be the Licker. This is probably, if I was gonna do like coolest Resident Evil monsters, he would be second to Nemesis, because this thing is just such a wild ass design, this dog-like look to it with human-like limbs, but just in the total wrong position, and the brain being exposed and that big ass fucking tongue. My first exposure to the Licker was the Resident Evil movie, because like I said, I hadn't played Resident Evil games until Resident Evil 4, so, you know, I'm a little bit undereducated as far as that whenever I was that young, but when I first saw it in the movie, I was like, that's kind of cool, but when you encounter it in the video game, especially with the Resident Evil 2 remake, where it doesn't have this cutscene like the original game where you're like, oh shit, what is that? Resident Evil 2, the remake, you walk into a room and a fucking body just drops and you're like, what the hell? And all of a sudden this thing's on the ceiling coming after you and you're like, oh fuck! And you just start firing bullets at it.
Have we been here before? What the? Oh, we out! Oh, we out! Bro, oh my gosh, I'm dead. I'm dead. Bro, how did he kick me? I can't even speak. Bro, we can't fight that. We can't do nothing with him.
This thing is so scary that you will literally walk through a room of zombies and try to save every bullet that you have just in case eventually you come across a Licker. Because you do have the ability to sneak past them, but if there's zombies in that room, good luck. Now we are at the top 2, and this was a hard top 2 for me to decide, because while one is very gameplay centric with how scary it is, the other one is all story and background and lore with why they are so terrifying. And what I ended up on with number 2 is the Regenerator / Iron Maiden. I'm kind of putting them together because one's just kind of an upgrade of the other, from Resident Evil 4. Now this is one of the scariest, if not the scariest encounter you will have with just a regular cannon fodder enemy in any of the Resident Evil games, where you get to this laboratory side of this island in Resident Evil 4 and you see these things hanging up in this assembly line. They're just kind of chilling out. And then eventually you see one on a table, and there's a spot where you get an item and you turn around and this little cutscene plays where you hear that fucking sound is 90% of why this bitch is so scary. And you look and you turn the corner and this thing that was hanging up and it was laying on this table is now, and you're like, what the hell? And you start firing at it, and none of the things that Resident Evil 4 has taught you about how to dispatch enemies works on this son of a bitch. You shoot things, he keeps coming. You blow off legs, he starts crawling towards you. Blow off arms, he starts using his fucking chin to come after you. You're like, what the hell?
What is that thing?
Then eventually you figure out that he's got parasites inside of him and you have to use this little infrared scope or something like a grenade launcher or a shotgun and get very lucky with where you shoot him and dispose of the parasites before you can actually kill him. But before you figure that out, hairs standing up straight. But my number one scariest Resident Evil monster for me is going to be Lisa Trevor from the Resident Evil remake. And I don't believe she's in the original Resident Evil, but correct me down below if she is. But this is a character that is so tragic and depressing and demented with the story that it chills you to your bone every single time you encounter her. Now, she's scary as shit on her own because of the look. It's like Quasimodo Hunchback with a bunch of leather faces all over her, and she's got these big ass shackles, and she will beat the shit out of you in a second, but she just drops in out of nowhere, and you're like, fuck, and you're running around, and you find out the lore that this was a little girl who her and her mother were experimented on and kidnapped by Umbrella, and she started to mutate, and she started wearing the skin and the faces of her victims to cover how demented she became to look, and then she was just so pissed off and angry because her mother died and she couldn't find her. And that's the way that you defeat her, is by uncovering her mother's corpse, and she literally tears her mother's skull off and just jumps to her death, presumably. It's not even a villain that you can defeat. Jesus, how fucked up can you be to write something like that? So that's it, guys. Those are my top 10 scariest Resident Evil monsters. What do you guys think? What are yours down below? Let me know. If there's one that I missed, tell me why. If there's some that are even scarier in the games that I have not played, be sure to give me some explanation for those, and I might look up a video or something. I don't know if I'm gonna get to play them, but let me know down below what your guys' ranking is and give me some reasons so we can chat about it. Please like and share this video, hit that subscribe button on your way out, and as always, guys, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean that you have to be.